Ever find yourself staring into your coffee cup at like 2 a.m., wondering if like that chipped edge makes it less of a cup? Huh.
No?
Just me then. Okay, maybe not. But that right there, that's
Yeah.
philosophy creeping in.
It's funny you should mention that. We might not realize it, but those everyday moments of questioning, those wait but why thoughts, those are like little doorways into the world of philosophy.
And that's what we're diving into today. We've got this stack of notes about philosophy. Maybe you're prepping for a big exam. Or maybe you, like me, just find yourself lost in a Wikipedia spiral at odd hours. Either way, consider this your crash course in asking those big, sometimes brain-bending questions.
Exactly. And don't worry, this isn't about memorizing names and dates. It's about understanding the powerful ideas that have shaped how we see the world and ourselves.
Yeah. Let's start with the obvious. What exactly is philosophy?
At its heart, philosophy is really just a love of wisdom. It's about using reason and logic to try and understand the world around us, our place in it, and the big questions that keep us up at night.
Okay, so how is that different from, say, science? They're both trying to understand things, right?
Absolutely. But think of it this way. Scientists usually have labs, experiments, data to work with. Philosophers, on the other hand, they have their minds. They use logic, arguments, thought experiments. It's all about asking why and challenging what we think we know.
So instead of test tubes and beakers, they're using pure brain power.
Precisely. And the questions they tackle, well, let's just say they're not for the faint of heart. We're talking about the really big ones. What is real? How do we know anything for sure? What does it mean to be good? What's the point of it all?
Whoa, yeah, those are some heavy hitters. Let's start with that first one. What is real? This is where things start to get a little matrixy, right?
A little bit. This is the realm of metaphysics. It grapples with the fundamental nature of reality. For example, are we just physical beings in a physical world? Or is there something more going on? Think about your own experiences, feelings, thoughts, dreams. They don't seem quite as solid as, say, a brick wall, do they?
That's a really good point. It makes you wonder if there's more to us than meets the eye. Literally. And that actually reminds me of something I read about dualism. It's the idea that the mind and body are separate entities, right?
You got it. Descartes, a famous philosopher, really wrestled with this idea. He even had this famous thought experiment where he realized he could doubt the existence of everything around him, including his own body, but he couldn't doubt the existence of his own mind, of the fact that he was doubting.
Wow, that's such a mind-bending concept to think you could doubt your own body but not your mind. So does that mean our thoughts, our consciousness, exist independently of our physical selves?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that philosophers are still debating. On the other side, you have thinkers like Aristotle, who believe that everything, including our minds, arises from the physical world.
So it's like this ongoing tug of war between what we can see and touch and what we experience internally.
Exactly. And this debate isn't just some abstract philosophical puzzle. It has real implications for how we understand things like consciousness, artificial intelligence, even the possibility of life after death.
Okay, so we've talked about the nature of reality itself, but how do we even know if what we perceive is an accurate reflection of that reality? That's where epistemology comes in, right?
Right on. Epistemology is all about the theory of knowledge, how we know what we know. It might seem simple at first, but once you start digging deeper, it gets really complex.
How do we trust our senses?
That's a great question. And it leads us to one of the biggest debates in epistemology,
Hmm?
the one between empiricism and rationalism.
Okay, break those down for me. What are they all about?
Well, empiricists, they're like the scientists of the philosophy world. They believe that all knowledge comes from our senses, from experiencing the world around us.
So, like, if you've never tasted chocolate, you don't really know what chocolate is.
Exactly. It's all about observation, experimentation, evidence. But then you have the rationalists, and they're like,
Yeah.
hold on a second. Our senses can be tricked.
True. Think about optical illusions. You know that image is playing tricks on you, but you can't help but see it.
Precisely. And that's where rationalism comes in. Rationalists believe that some knowledge is innate, meaning we're born with it. They argue that our senses can be unreliable, so we need logic and reason to help us understand the true nature of things.
Okay, I see where they're coming from, but how do we know what's innate knowledge and what we've learned from experience? That seems like a really tricky thing to untangle.
It really is, and that's why epistemology is such a fascinating, albeit complex, field. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about knowing. But let's move on from how we know things to the question of how we should act.
You mean ethics? Yeah, that's a big one.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And it's where philosophy really starts to hit home. After all, we're constantly faced with choices, big and small, right? And ethics helps us grapple with those choices, figure out what it means to be good.
And are there different schools of thought when it comes to ethics too?
You bet. You got utilitarianism, which says the most ethical choice is one that brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. Sounds pretty good, right?
On the surface, yeah. But I can see how that could get messy really fast.
Exactly. What about those situations where helping the majority might harm a smaller group? That's one of the big criticisms of utilitarianism.
So if utilitarianism isn't always the answer, what are some other options?
Well, you've also got deontology, which emphasizes following moral rules and duties, regardless of the outcome. Think of it like having a set of unbreakable commandments guiding your actions.
So it's less about the consequences and more about sticking to your principle.
Exactly. Immanuel Kant, a major figure in deontology, believed that lying is always wrong, no matter what. Even if a little white lie could save someone's life, he'd argue against it.
Wow. Talk about sticking to your guns.
Oh, yeah.
I see how both approaches have their merits, but also some potential pitfalls.
For sure. And that's why ethics can be so challenging. There's rarely a clear-cut answer. It's about weighing different values, considering different perspectives, and trying to make the most ethical choice you can in each situation.
Okay, so we've talked about what's real, how we know what we know, and how we should act. But there's still this one big question looming over everything. What's the meaning of life? And is that even a question philosophy can answer?
Yes, the million-dollar question. And, you know, this is where things get really interesting. It's where we bump into existentialism.
Existentialism, that's the one that always seemed a bit intimidating, like staring into the void or something.
It can feel that way, especially at first. You see, existentialism starts from the premise that life has no inherent meaning, no grand plan, no predetermined purpose, just us, existing in this vast and often indifferent universe.
Okay, yeah, that is kind of a daunting thought. But if there's no inherent meaning, does that mean we're all just wandering around aimlessly?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's where existentialism gets really empowering. Because if there's no preset meaning, then we're free to create our own.
Wait, so it's not about finding meaning out there in the world, it's about creating it ourselves.
Exactly. Think of it like this. You're handed a blank canvas. It's up to you to decide what you want to paint, what story you want to tell with your life.
That's actually a really beautiful way to put it. But how do we even begin to create our own meaning? Where do we even start?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And existentialism encourages us to grapple with it head on. It's about examining our values, our passions, our experiences, and asking ourselves what truly matters to us.
So it's about living intentionally, making choices that align with who we are and what we want our lives to stand for.
You've got it. And that might look different for everyone. For some, it might be about pursuing a creative passion. For others, it might be about building meaningful relationships or fighting for a cause they believe in. There's no right or wrong answer, as long as it's authentic to you.
So even though existentialism might start with this kind of scary premise, that life has no inherent meaning, it ultimately puts the power back in our hands.
Exactly. It's a call to action, an invitation to live a more conscious and fulfilling life.
This is definitely making me think about things in a whole new light. But I have to admit, it's a lot to process.
It definitely can be. And that's the beauty of philosophy. It's a journey, not a destination.
So how can we take all of these big, heady ideas and actually apply them to our lives?
That's where the real magic happens. It's about taking those aha moments and letting them inform our choices, our relationships, our perspectives.
Okay. I like the sound of that. But I imagine it's not always easy.
It's not always easy, no. But even small steps can make a big difference. Maybe it's choosing to respond to a situation with more empathy and understanding, or taking a moment to appreciate the beauty in everyday things.
So it's about being more present, more aware of ourselves and the world around us.
You got it. It's about living a more examined life, as Socrates would say. And who knows? That examination might just lead to a more fulfilling and meaningful existence.
I love that idea. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's one area I'd like to circle back to ethics. We talked about the different schools of thought, but how can philosophy actually equip us to handle those tough moral dilemmas we face in the real world?
You're right. It's one thing to talk about ethics in theory, but when you're facing a real-life dilemma, it can feel a lot more complicated.
It's like, everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's telling you what's right. But how do you actually decide what to do?
That's where philosophy can really come in handy. It's not about giving you a cheat sheet with all the right answers, but it can give you a framework for making thoughtful, ethical decisions.
So instead of just going with my gut or following the crowd, I can use these philosophical tools to examine the situation more objectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Remember those different ethical frameworks we talked about earlier?
Right.
Like utilitarianism and deontology. They're like different lenses you can use to examine the same situation from multiple angles.
Okay, so utilitarianism helps me see the big picture, the potential consequences for everyone involved, while deontology reminds me to stick to my principles, even when it's tough.
Precisely. And by looking at the same dilemma through these different lenses, you can start to see the nuances, the complexities that might not have been obvious at first.
I'm starting to get it. It's about asking yourself, what would each of these ethical approaches suggest I do and why? What feels right to me and why?
Exactly. It's about engaging in that inner debate, that thoughtful reflection, and then making the most ethical choice you can, given all the factors involved.
And even if there's no perfect solution, that process of careful consideration is still valuable in itself.
Absolutely, because it's not just about the outcome. It's about the process, about striving to be a more ethical person in everything you do. It's about developing that moral muscle, so to speak.
Wow. This is so much more than just a bunch of theories. It's actually a really practical way to navigate the complexities of life.
Exactly. And the more you engage with these ideas,
Yeah.
the more they become ingrained in your thinking. It becomes like a reflex to pause, to consider different perspectives, to make choices that align with your values.
You know, I have to admit, when we first started this deep dive, I was a little intimidated by philosophy. It seems so big and abstract. But the more we've talked, the more I've realized that it's really about understanding ourselves and the world around us in a deeper, more meaningful way.
I'm so glad to hear that. Because that's really what philosophy is all about. It's about asking questions, challenging assumptions,
Hmm.
and embracing the beauty of not knowing all the answers.
And who knows? In the process of asking those questions, we might even stumble upon a few answers along the way, or at least gain a new perspective that enriches our lives.
Couldn't said it better myself.
So to our listeners, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by all these big philosophical ideas, don't worry. You don't have to become a scholar overnight. Just remember this. Curiosity is your compass. Keep asking why. Keep exploring. And you might be surprised by what you discover within yourself and the world around you.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself staring into your coffee cup at 2 a.m., pondering the nature of reality, and realizing that philosophy isn't just for stuffy classrooms. It's for everyone, everywhere.
And on that note, this has been an incredible deep dive. Until next time, keep those philosophical gears turning.